The auditorium was humming with the soft chatter of proud parents and flashing cameras. I sat in the third row, gripping the edge of my seat as I watched my daughter Emma walk across the stage. Her name echoed over the speakers, Emma Clark, and I felt something tighten in my chest. Pride, of course, but something else too, something older, something heavier. Emma looked beautiful in her navy blue graduation gown, her long auburn hair pulled into a simple ponytail that swayed with each step. She moved with quiet confidence, and I saw traces of her mother in the way she held her shoulders, but there was also something of me in her eyes, something that had seen disappointment and learned not to flinch. When she reached the dean, shook his hand and took her diploma, I stood to clap. My hands came together with awkward force and I felt tears prickling behind my eyes. Emma was the first Clark to graduate on time in 2 generations. That should have meant something to everyone in the family, to my mother, but it didn't. Next to me, my mum clapped politely. Not a smile, not a tear, just a mechanical acknowledgement, like she was checking a box. Emma stepped down and came toward us, her face glowing, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found mine. She smiled. I smiled back. And then my mother stood up. From her purse, she pulled out a small square box, wrapped in blue paper with a silver ribbon. She extended it toward Emma like she was offering something sacred. My daughter took it, her eyes curious, hopeful even. I watched her fingers slide under the ribbon, watched the paper fall to the floor like snowflakes. Inside was a white ceramic mug. It had gold writing on the front, "Shoot for the stars." That was it. Emma blinked. She smiled politely. Emma always smiles politely, and thanked her grandmother with the kind of grace I never mastered at her age. She didn't ask questions. She didn't show disappointment, but I saw it in the way she tilted her head. She had expected something more, something meaningful. I knew exactly how that felt. I was about to say something, maybe a joke to ease the moment, when my mom turned sharply and reached into her coat pocket. She pulled out a thick envelope. It was cream-colored, with a red ribbon tied neatly around it. She handed it to my nephew, Ryan, my sister Jill's son, who was standing right behind Emma. "Here," my mom said. "It's time." Ryan looked surprised. He untied the ribbon carefully like he knew this was something valuable, and when he slid the envelope open, a pair of keys fell into his hand. Old keys, heavy ones. I didn't need to ask. I already knew. They were the keys to our lake house, our childhood sanctuary, the place my father built with his bare hands in the early 70s, the place where I taught Emma how to fish, where I scattered my dad's ashes into the water on a quiet October morning. And now, those keys belonged to Ryan, not to me, not to Emma, not even to Jill, just Ryan. Emma turned toward me, mug still in her hand, eyes blinking a little faster now. Her mouth opened as if to ask something, then closed again. She looked away. I stood there in the middle of a celebration, with confetti falling from the rafters and a lump in my throat so big I could barely breathe. That mug felt heavier than the keys, and in that moment, I realized something cruel. History had found a way to repeat itself. The drive home from the ceremony was quiet. Emma sat in the passenger seat, her graduation cap resting in her lap. The white mug was still tucked inside the blue gift box, unopened again, like it had somehow retreated back into secrecy. Her fingers traced the edge of the box absent-mindedly, like she was trying to feel something that wasn't there. I wanted to say something. I kept glancing at her from the corner of my eye, hoping she would break the silence first. But she didn't, and I didn't know how to begin. I had rehearsed this day in my mind 100 times. Imagined taking her out for a celebratory dinner, maybe even sharing a beer if she felt bold enough. I thought there would be laughter, a toast, maybe even a moment where we both looked at each other and saw not just father and daughter, but two people who made it through something together. Instead, we drove through Milwaukee's quiet suburbs under a gray sky, listening to the sound of our own breathing. About halfway home, I asked, "You hungry?" Emma shook her head without looking up. "Not really." I nodded, pretending I wasn't disappointed. "I know it wasn't what you expected," I said finally. Emma looked at me, her eyebrows pulled together gently. "What do you mean?" "The mug," I replied. "The whole thing with Grandma." She hesitated. "It's fine, Dad." But it wasn't. Emma had learned early on how to shrink her feelings to fit the room. That was something she got from her mother. Or maybe from me. From all of us, really. The Clarks didn't do confrontation. We swallowed things, let them rot quietly in the stomach, until they turned into silence. "Keys to the lake house," I muttered. That was unexpected. Emma didn't respond. "She never even told me she was planning to give it to Ryan," I added, trying not to sound bitter and failing. Still nothing. We pulled into the driveway. Our house was modest, 2 stories with peeling paint on the porch railings. I hadn't gotten around to fixing it since the last winter storm. Emma gathered her things slowly, placing the box with the mug on top of her graduation cap. As we reached the door, she turned to me and asked, "Did you ever think she'd give it to you?" I paused, hand on the doorknob. "No," I said. "Not really." She nodded once and went inside. I stood there for a second, the wind brushing against the back of my neck. The smell of damp earth hung in the air, the way it always did after spring rain, and I thought back to the last time I held those keys. It was 10 years ago. Emma was 8. We had just spent a weekend at the lake house, her chasing fireflies barefoot, while I grilled burgers with my father's old apron wrapped around my waist. My mother had left early that weekend, citing a headache. She always left early. As I locked the front door of the cabin that Sunday afternoon, I remember looking out at the lake thinking, this is what I'll leave her one day. Not money, not status, but this place, these memories, this quiet kind of inheritance. And now the keys were in Ryan's hands, and I didn't know what to do with the silence that followed. The next morning, I found the mug sitting on the kitchen counter, still in its box. Emma hadn't touched it. She'd come home late the night before after going out with her friends, probably trying to salvage the day. I didn't ask how it went, she didn't offer, but I noticed she wasn't wearing her usual smile when she came in. Just a quiet nod and a "night, Dad," before disappearing upstairs. I stood there in the kitchen, coffee brewing behind me, staring at that mug like it might offer an answer. I lifted the lid again and pulled it out. It was light, almost fragile. The gold letters were slightly faded, like it had been sitting in some drawer for years before my mother decided it was good enough to pass on. I turned it over. No note, no card, just a price sticker still clinging to the bottom. I placed it back in the box. It wasn't about the mug, not really. It was about everything it represented. Growing up, I was never the favored child. That title belonged to Jill. She was 4 years younger, softer around the edges, easier to manage. My mom adored her. Me? I was the one who asked too many questions. The one who disappeared behind books and forgot to say thank you. The one who got suspended in 9th grade for punching a kid who called Dad a drunk. My father was the only one who ever understood me. He didn't say much, but when he did, it mattered. He took me fishing, taught me how to repair broken floorboards, gave me his old record player when I turned 16. But he also gave me something else, his silence. The kind that settled in a room like dust. When he died, the silence took over completely. And my mother? Well, she hardened in ways I didn't think possible. She became colder, more exacting. Jill had Ryan a year after high school and moved in with Mom temporarily. Temporarily turned into 12 years. Ryan grew up in the same house I had once felt invisible in, but he didn't seem to feel the same cold. He flourished there. Private school, piano lessons, a car for his 17th birthday. Meanwhile, I was raising Emma in a 2-bedroom rental, juggling double shifts after the divorce. I didn't envy Ryan, but I envied what he got. And yesterday, when I saw those keys fall into his hands, something inside me cracked. I heard the stairs creak and turned to see Emma walking in, hair messy, sweatshirt hanging off one shoulder. "Morning," she said, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, sweetheart. Want some coffee?" She shook her head. "Just cereal." I poured her a bowl and slid it across the counter. She sat, spoon in hand, eyes still heavy. "About yesterday," I began. "You don't have to explain anything, Dad." "I want to." I should have said something. I should have stood up for you. Emma stirred her cereal without looking up. It's fine. No, it's not. She sighed and finally met my eyes. Honestly, I just didn't expect anything from her. Not really. But when she gave him the keys, that stung. I swallowed hard. She's always had favorites, I said. You don't have to take it personally. Emma raised an eyebrow. But it is personal. I'm your daughter. Doesn't that mean something to her? I used to wonder the same thing, I whispered. The words hung there between us. Emma didn't ask what I meant. She didn't need to, because she already knew. Later that week, Jill called. I saw her name light up my phone screen while I was in the garage, halfway through fixing the broken hinge on Emma's closet door. I hesitated before answering. My sister and I weren't exactly estranged, but we weren't close either. Our conversations always felt like navigating a hallway lined with old picture frames, each one crooked in its own way, and full of things we never really said out loud. I wiped my hands on a rag and answered. Hey, I said. Hey, she replied. Her voice was flat, a little guarded. Just wanted to check in. Graduation was nice. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. Yeah, Emma looked beautiful. She did. I'm proud of her. Thanks. There was a pause. I wanted to ask, she continued, if you're okay with Mom giving Ryan the lake house. There it was, the courtesy call, a retroactive band-aid on a cut that had already gone deep. I leaned against the workbench. Does it matter if I'm not? I'm trying to do this the right way. Jill, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I found out the same moment as everyone else. She didn't even tell me she was considering it. Ryan didn't even grow up there. He did, she said quietly. For 12 years. I pinched the bridge of my nose. That's not the same. And you know it. I know you're upset. That's putting it mildly. Another pause. She thinks it'll help him settle down. He's been struggling with direction. This could give him something to hold on to. I laughed under my breath. And what about Emma? What does she get to hold on to? She has you, Jill said. That hit harder than I expected. She had me, I said, but she doesn't have any part of that history of our dad, of that cabin. You can still take her there, Jill offered. Ryan's not kicking anyone out. I shook my head. It's not about permission, Jill. It's about belonging, about being remembered. She was quiet. I didn't know it still hurt you that much, she said. It never stopped hurting. She didn't reply after that. We said goodbye a few minutes later, each in our own version of restraint, as if neither of us wanted to say the wrong thing and lose what little thread we still had between us. That night, after Emma went to bed, I found myself pulling an old box out from the back of my closet. It was heavy, covered in dust. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were photographs from the lake house, most of them taken by my dad. Grainy prints from the 80s and early 90s. There was one of me at age 10, holding a fish almost as big as my forearm, grinning with pride as Dad stood behind me, his hand on my shoulder. Another of Jill in the canoe with our mum, both looking toward the water, unsmiling. That was the summer before Dad got sick, and at the bottom of the box was a bracelet, worn leather, with a tiny silver plate that had my initials carved into it. I made it at a summer camp when I was 12. Dad used to wear it around his wrist like a charm, even though it barely fit him. I remember the first time I saw it on him, I thought he was just being nice, but he wore it for years, until the leather cracked. I held it in my hand for a long time, and for the first time in a long time I wondered, if he was still here, would things have turned out differently? The next morning, I left the bracelet on the kitchen table. Not for Emma to find, necessarily. I wasn't trying to stage a moment, but something inside me needed it to be seen, to be acknowledged. Maybe I just didn't want to be the only one remembering anymore. I poured myself some coffee and sat at the table, watching the light spill through the window. The sun was still low, turning the dust in the air gold. Emma came downstairs a few minutes later, her hair still damp from a quick shower, wearing that grey hoodie she always borrowed from me in the winters. Her eyes fell on the bracelet. She didn't touch it. just looked at it for a long moment. "Was that Grandpa's?" she asked, finally sitting down across from me. "Yeah," I said. "I made it when I was a kid. He wore it until the leather wore through." Emma smiled gently, but there was something behind it. A question, maybe, or a worry. "He was quiet, right?" she asked. "Like, Mom says he wasn't mean, just kind of far away." I thought about that. "He was quiet, yeah, but I never thought he was far. He showed up in his own way." She nodded slowly. "I wish I'd known him." I sipped my coffee. "Me too." She reached out then, touched the bracelet with her fingertips. "You ever think about going back? To the lake house, I mean." "All the time," I said. "But now—" I didn't finish the sentence. I didn't need to. The air filled in the silence for me. Emma leaned back in her chair. "I've only been there once. I was little. I remember it smelled like pine and something else. Like old books, maybe." I smiled. "That sounds about right. It always smelled like my dad's cologne and whatever he used to clean the fishing gear. Did Grandma go often? Not really. She liked the idea of it more than the reality. Too many bugs. No phone signal." Emma raised an eyebrow. "But she still gave it to Ryan." I exhaled slowly. "She gave it to who she thought deserved it." Emma tilted her head, studying me. "Do you think she's right?" The question startled me. I looked away. "I think she's made peace with who we are in her mind, and no matter what we do, we don't get to rewrite her version of the story." Emma didn't speak for a while. Then she said, "I think that's the part that hurts the most." "What is?" "That no matter how much we try, we can't make some people love us the way we need them to." I didn't know what to say. She was right, and she'd learned it far too early. Later that day, I got a text from Jill. "Mom wants to invite everyone to the lake house for a weekend in July. She says it'll be like old times. Ryan will host." I stared at the message for a long time. "Old times," she wrote, as if the past hadn't been stitched with silence and favoritism and the kind of wounds that turn invisible unless you know exactly where to press. Emma walked by, noticed me staring at my phone. "What's up?" I turned the screen toward her. She read it. "Are we going?" "I don't know yet." She looked at me, her voice gentle. "Do you want to?" I hesitated. "I'm afraid if I go back, I won't be able to leave the past there." Emma's eyes softened. "Maybe that's exactly why we should go." We drove up on a Friday. It took a little over 3 hours to get to the lake. Long enough for silence to settle between us again, but not the heavy kind. This silence felt more like anticipation, or maybe anxiety. The sky had that washed-out summer tone, not quite blue, not quite grey, and the radio played quietly beneath the hum of the tires. Emma had packed light, a backpack and a duffel tossed in the back seat, with a book poking out of the zipper. She always brought books, even when she knew she wouldn't read them. As we pulled onto the familiar gravel road, I felt my throat tighten. The trees hadn't changed much. Same tall birches along the edge, same sagging mailbox at the fork. I could almost hear the sound of my dad's truck rumbling up that path, windows down, his elbow hanging out the side. The cabin came into view slowly, like it was rising from the woods. It looked older, smaller. Time had faded the wood siding and the porch steps were sagging a little, but the dock was still intact, stretching out into the still, mirror-like water. And the air smelled the same. Pine Lake, a hint of smoke from the fire pit out back. Ryan was already there. He waved as we parked, stepping off the porch with a practiced ease, like he'd already started to make it his. He wore cargo shorts and a brewer's cap, his sunglasses tucked into the neck of his t-shirt. "Hey, Uncle Ben," he said, pulling me into a quick hug. I nodded stiffly. "Hey, Rye." "Emma," he said, turning with a smile. "It's been forever." "Yeah," she replied, smiling politely. "Since that 4th of July, I think." "Right, you were like 10. She gave a small laugh. "Thanks for making me feel ancient." Ryan chuckled and offered to grab our bags. We followed him into the cabin, and I felt my chest tighten again as soon as I stepped inside. It was cleaner than I remembered. New rugs, fresh paint. A flat screen where the old tube TV used to sit. The scent of lemon cleaner had replaced the old, earthy musk. But beneath it all, I still felt the pulse of memory. My father's boots by the door, the old rocking chair that creaked with his weight, the quiet way he used to whistle while chopping wood outside. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through a magazine. She looked up when we walked in. "Ben, Emma, I'm glad you came." I nodded. "Thanks for inviting us." Emma gave her a side hug. "Hi, Grandma." My mother returned it awkwardly. "You've grown into such a beautiful young lady." We stood there for a moment, the air between us stiff. "I put you two in the upstairs room," Mom said, "the one that used to be yours, Ben." My heart skipped. "Thanks." That night, after dinner, grilled chicken, corn on the cob, and a potato salad that tasted exactly like the one my father used to make. I stepped out onto the dock while Emma stayed behind with Ryan and Jill. I needed air, or distance. The lake was quiet, the water still. I could hear crickets and the faint rustle of leaves. I stared out across the surface, watching the last orange smudge of sunlight disappear behind the trees. I don't know how long I stood there before I heard footsteps behind me. "Didn't think you'd actually come," my mother said. I turned slowly. She was holding a glass of wine, her hair pinned back, her face lit by the last of the fading light. "Neither did I," said. She stepped closer, looking out at the water beside me. "I thought it might be good for everyone," she said, "to be together again, to let the past rest." I clenched my jaw. "Is that what you think this is? Closure?" "I think it's an opportunity," she replied. "To remember what mattered." I laughed quietly. "To remember who mattered, you mean?" She didn't respond. We stood there for a moment longer, the distance between us more than just the space on the dock. And then she said something I wasn't ready for. "You always looked so much like your father when you stood out here, especially when you were angry." I turned toward her, unsure how to respond. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the briefest second I saw something in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. Regret. That night, I couldn't sleep. The upstairs room still smelled like cedar and mothballs. The bed creaked when I shifted, and the floor groaned beneath every footstep like it remembered my weight. I stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows from the trees sway against the moonlight. Emma slept in the cot next to the window, curled up, headphones in. I envied her peace. She had always been able to make space for herself, even in uncomfortable places. I used to wonder if that was a strength or just something she learned from watching me survive in silence. Around 2 a.m., I got up and made my way downstairs. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the old clock above the mantel. I poured myself a glass of water, then sat at the kitchen table staring at the wood grain. My father used to sit in that same spot, writing notes on the backs of napkins, grocery lists, fishing logs. Little things that didn't seem important at the time, but now felt like tiny relics of connection. I was still sitting there when I heard footsteps again. My mother appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a faded blue robe. Her eyes were tired but alert, as if she hadn't been sleeping either. "I thought I heard someone," she said softly. "Just me," I replied. She hesitated, then pulled out the chair across from me. We sat in silence for a while, the kind that neither of us knew how to break. "You hated this house when you were a teenager," she said finally. I looked at her. "I hated how quiet it got here." She nodded. "You used to disappear into the woods for hours. I'd worry. You never said." "I didn't know how," she admitted. "I wasn't raised to talk about feelings." "You were raised to ignore them." She let out a dry laugh. Probably my mother was colder than I ever managed to be. That wasn't saying much, I thought, but I kept it to myself. "I wasn't a good mother to you," she said suddenly. The words landed with a quiet thud between us. No theatrics, just a plain truth laid on the table like a cracked plate. "I don't remember a lot of comfort," I said. "I remember a lot of rules." "I was scared," she said. "Your father, he made things look easy. But after he passed, I realized how much I didn't know, how much I depended on him to be the warm one. And I didn't want to lose control, so I doubled down on what I could manage. You gave everything to Jill. She needed more. So did I. She looked down at her hands. "I didn't think you'd want it," she said. "The house, the legacy. You were always running from it." "I wasn't running," I said. "I was surviving." She blinked hard, and I saw something shift in her posture. A kind of collapse. "I didn't know how to love you in the way you needed," she whispered. It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to ask why it had taken her this long, why it took keys and envelopes and ceremonies for her to even acknowledge the fracture. But I also knew that pressing her now might shut the door again, and I wasn't sure I could take another slam. So instead I said, "He wore that bracelet for years, you know." She looked up. "I found it in a box last week. Still smells like the lake." She closed her eyes for a second. "He missed you when you moved out." "I missed him every day since." She reached across the table then, her hand brushing mine, tentative, fragile. I didn't pull away. The next morning, the house was filled with sunlight. Emma was already downstairs, sitting cross-legged on the dock with a cup of tea in her hands. Her hair glowed in the early light, and her hoodie hung off one shoulder like it always did. I stood at the window for a moment, just watching her, the way fathers sometimes do when they suddenly realize their children have become people. Real, whole people with inner lives and quiet resilience. I made coffee and stepped outside. She didn't turn when I sat down next to her, just kept her eyes on the water, sipping slowly. "Did you sleep okay?" I asked. She nodded. "Yeah, this place is quieter than I remember." I chuckled. That's what I used to hate about it. She smiled faintly. "I think I like it now." We sat there a long while, listening to the birds, the soft lapping of water against the dock. The kind of morning where nothing needs to be said out loud, but everything is felt anyway. "I talked to Grandma last night," I said finally. Emma turned slightly, surprised. "She said some things I didn't think I'd ever hear." "Like what?" I hesitated. "That she was scared, that she didn't know how to love me the way I needed." Emma let out a breath. That's big." "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "Do you believe her?" "I don't know yet." She nodded slowly, understanding. We sat for a while longer until Jill came out with a tray of food, eggs, toast, some fresh fruit. Ryan followed behind her carrying his guitar, strumming softly. I hadn't heard him play in years. He used to be obsessed with music when he was a kid. I'd taught him a few chords when he was 10. I wondered if he remembered that. We all ate together on the porch. It was the first time we'd shared a meal like that since my dad's funeral. Afterward, Ryan asked if anyone wanted to go out on the canoe. Emma jumped at the chance. They laughed as they paddled out across the lake, their voices echoing back toward the house, in waves of lightness that felt unfamiliar. Almost hopeful. I stayed behind, sipping the last of my coffee, watching them glide across the water like they belonged to it. My mother joined me again, sitting in the chair across from me. She was holding something wrapped in cloth. "I found this in the back closet," she said, handing it to me. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a leather-bound notebook. The edges were frayed. The cover was cracked. My initials were carved into the corner. I stared at it. "I didn't even know this still existed," I said. "You used to write in it every summer," she replied. "I read one page once. You were 13. You wrote, 'I hope one day someone notices the things I don't say.'" I blinked hard. She placed her hand on mine. "I'm noticing now." It wasn't enough. But it was something. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to carry the whole story by myself. That night, Emma showed me a picture she took from the canoe, the lake stretching endlessly in front of her, the trees arching like quiet witnesses, and the cabin behind us, small but whole. "I think I'd like to come back here someday," she said. I nodded. "Maybe you will." But what I didn't say, what I couldn't say, was that coming back only matters when there's something left to come back to. That evening, a storm rolled in. It came without warning. A thick, dark mass over the tree line, swallowing the light with the kind of authority only nature has. By the time we realized how quickly it was moving, the wind had already picked up, shaking the shutters and sending dry leaves spinning across the deck. Ryan and Emma rushed to bring the canoe back in, their clothes soaked through, laughing as they pulled it up onto the gravel. Jill ran towels to them at the door, shouting something about how this always happened in July. My mother watched from the kitchen window, arms crossed, a tight expression on her face. She never liked storms. They made her uneasy, vulnerable even. I stood behind her watching the trees bend. "You still nervous when the weather turns?" I asked. She didn't turn to look at me. "It's not the weather I'm afraid of. It's the memories that come with it." I waited, but she said nothing else. That night the power went out. It was just after dinner, a simple meal of sandwiches and soup by candlelight. When the lights flickered and disappeared, no one panicked. We lit more candles. Jill and Ryan played cards. Emma wrapped herself in a blanket and watched the flames in the fireplace like they held answers. I sat with my mother at the kitchen table again, the shadows making her face look softer somehow. She reached into her cardigan and pulled out a small bundle. "Found these too," she said. It was a stack of letters, folded neatly, tied with a thin string. The paper had yellowed with age. My name was written in my father's handwriting on every envelope. I froze. "I thought they were gone," I whispered. "They were in the crawl space inside an old tackle box. I never touched them." My hands trembled as I untied the bundle. I opened the first letter. It was dated the summer I turned 16. "Ben, I saw how you looked at me today, like I'd let you down, and I probably did. I wasn't there when you needed to scream. I wasn't there when you needed someone to hold it together for you. But I want you to know I see you. I see how hard you're trying to be okay when no one is making space for that. I don't know how to say it out loud, I never learned, but I love you, always have, even when I didn't say it right." I blinked rapidly, my fingers tightening around the page. There were 7 more letters, each one written from the lake house. Each one sealed, never sent. I looked up at my mother. "Why didn't you give these to me?" She looked at the flickering candle. I was angry. At him. At you. That stunned me. I didn't understand how a child could be so full of silence. How you could disappear into yourself like that. I thought you were punishing me. I stared at her, the words sharp and echoing. I was trying not to break. She closed her eyes. "I know that now." The candle danced between us. The thunder rolled gently in the background, like distant applause for something neither of us wanted to perform. I read every letter that night, one by one. They weren't long. Some were barely a paragraph, but they felt like breath after drowning. My father had loved me. He had noticed. He had seen the boy I was, scared, bruised by silence, desperate for reassurance, and he had tried to reach me, even if his words never made it into my hands until now. When I finished the last one, I sat back in the chair, overwhelmed. Emma had come downstairs at some point, and she stood in the doorway watching me. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded slowly. "I think I'm just beginning to be." And I meant it. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't just the child who was forgotten. I was also the child who was loved. Quietly, imperfectly, but completely. The next morning, the storm had passed. Everything outside was wet and glistening. The dock glowed with rainwater, and the trees dripped softly, as if even nature was trying to let go of something. I stood barefoot on the porch with my coffee, staring out at the lake, the notebook and the bundle of letters sitting on the small side table beside me. Emma came out quietly, wrapped in a blanket, holding a cup of tea. She glanced at the letters, then at me. "You stayed up all night?" I nodded. I didn't want to stop reading him. She sat next to me, pulling the blanket tighter around her. "He sounds like someone I would have liked." "He was," I said. "Flawed, quiet, a little broken. But he had a way of making you feel safe, without needing to say much." She looked out at the water. "Kind of like you." The words landed gently but firmly. I cleared my throat. "He wrote me a letter every summer we came here. I just never got them." "Do you think he meant for Grandma to give them to you one day?" "I don't know," I said. "Part of me thinks he knew she wouldn't, but maybe that's why he kept writing them anyway. Maybe he hoped she'd eventually be ready to see what he saw in me. Emma was quiet for a moment. I think it's beautiful that he wrote them anyway, even without knowing if they'd ever reach you. That's brave. I looked over at her, seeing the outline of the woman she was becoming. Not just my daughter anymore, but her own person. Someone who carried pain with dignity and knew how to name what most people avoided. She had inherited something from me, but she had also become something I never managed to be at her age: open. We sat together in the early light, the wind brushing against our skin, the lake still and full of memory. Later that day, Jill suggested a walk through the woods behind the house. Emma and Ryan went along, and I followed behind at a distance, the letters tucked safely in my jacket. My mother stayed behind. The trail was familiar, pine needles soft underfoot, the faint scent of moss rising with the warmth. The trees bent in the same way they had 20 years ago, arching like quiet witnesses. About a mile in, we came to the clearing where we used to have bonfires. The old stones were still there, blackened and cracked from years of flames. We sat for a while. Ryan told stories from college. Emma laughed easily. I watched them, wondering if my father ever felt what I was feeling now. This bittersweet ache of realizing time had moved forward without asking permission. When we got back to the house, my mother was sitting on the porch, the old photo album open on her lap. She was looking at a picture of my dad, one where he was holding a fish, grinning, the same image I remembered from the box in my closet. I used to hate that picture, she said without looking up. Why? I asked, surprised. Because he looked so alive in it, and I never knew how to match that energy. I sat beside her. You didn't have to match it, I said quietly. You just had to make room for it. She nodded slowly. I see that now. She closed the album and looked at me. You turned out better than I expected. That's not a compliment, I said, half smiling. She chuckled. No, I guess it isn't. We sat in silence. Then she asked, do you think it's too late to change the story? I looked at her for a long time, and then I answered the only way I could. It depends which story you mean. That night, I stayed up late with Jill. The others had gone to bed. Emma with a book half open on her chest, Ryan curled up in a sleeping bag on the screened porch. Mom was in her room, lights out, door closed. The house creaked softly around us, like it remembered every version of our family that had ever passed through it. Jill poured us each a glass of wine and handed me one without a word. We sat in the kitchen, the candlelight flickering between us. You know, she said, swirling her glass, when I first moved in with Mom after Ryan was born, I thought I was just there until I got my feet under me. But I think part of me liked being the one she chose. I raised my eyebrows. You were also the one who never left. She smiled faintly. True. We were quiet for a while. Then I said, she gave you more than she gave me. And I don't mean things. I mean time, attention, patience. Jill nodded. She was harder on you. Always. Did you ever ask her why? She looked at me and said, because you reminded her of Dad, and she never forgave him for dying. I stared at her, my breath catching in my throat. She never said that, I said. She didn't have to, Jill replied. It was in the way she looked at you, like you were unfinished business. That landed harder than I wanted it to. Jill leaned forward. You have every right to be angry. I saw it all happen, Ben. I saw how she made you feel like you had to earn space just to breathe. I didn't understand it then, but I see it now. I looked down at my glass. I always wondered if I was just making it up, if maybe I was too sensitive or just hard to love. Jill reached across the table and touched my hand. You weren't hard to love. You were just invisible to someone who didn't know how to see you. I swallowed hard. I found the letters Dad wrote, I said. She nodded. I figured. She told me. I read them all. He saw me, Jill. He really saw me. Tears welled in her eyes. Of course he did. We sat there in silence, the truth settling between us like something fragile but finally real. The next day, we packed up to leave. The sky was a clean blue, the kind you only get after a storm clears out every speck of dust in the atmosphere. Emma was quiet as she folded her clothes. I could tell she didn't want to go. "Can I ask you something?" she said, zipping her bag. "Of course." "If Grandma never apologized, would you still forgive her?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at her. "I think forgiveness isn't always about the person who hurt you," I said. "Sometimes it's about choosing not to carry their damage any further." Emma looked at me, her eyes thoughtful. "So, you forgive her?" I exhaled slowly. "Not all the way, but I'm learning how to stop letting her decide who I am." She nodded. That afternoon, as we stood by the car, my mother came outside holding something in her hands. It was the mug, the same white ceramic mug with the fading gold letters. She walked over to Emma and handed it to her again. "I want you to have this." "But not as a gift, as a reminder." Emma looked puzzled. "Of what?" "That sometimes," my mother said, "we give the wrong things to the right people, and sometimes we realize too late what we should have given instead." Emma took the mug gently. My mother turned to me. "And sometimes we ask for grace even when we know we don't deserve it." I didn't answer, but I didn't turn away either. We didn't speak much on the drive home, not because there was tension, quite the opposite. It was the kind of quiet that followed something sacred, like we were each turning over pieces of the past in our hands, feeling their weight without needing to name every shard. Emma leaned her head against the window, the mug wrapped in a soft towel on her lap. Outside, the trees thinned into farmland, then suburbs, then the familiar outlines of Milwaukee. We didn't listen to music, just the wind and the road and our shared breath. Back home, I carried our bags inside, and Emma went upstairs without saying much. I found her later that night in her room, sitting on the floor, the mug beside her and one of the letters from my father unfolded on the carpet. "You kept one," I said, surprised. She nodded. "This one felt like it was meant for both of us." I sat down beside her and read over her shoulder. "There's more strength in the ones who keep showing up, even when they've been overlooked. You, Ben, are strong in a way that can't be taught. It has to be lived." I didn't realize I was crying until Emma reached out and took my hand. "Do you think he knew how much you needed to hear that?" she asked. "I think he knew exactly." We sat there for a while, her fingers wrapped around mine like she was trying to keep something from breaking. Later that week, I got a letter in the mail. It was from my mother. Not a text, not a phone call, a letter. Her handwriting was shaky but careful. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. "Ben, there are things I will never be able to explain. Things I wish I had done differently, not just with you, but with the whole shape of our family. I was not soft when you needed softness. I was not present when you needed presence. I see that now. I gave Ryan the keys because I thought I was doing something symbolic, passing something down to someone who still seemed to need my approval. But in doing so, I overlooked what you never asked for, but always deserved. I can't undo that moment, but I can try in whatever time we have left to be the kind of mother who owns her part in the silence. I hope someday that will matter." "Mom," I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the same box that held my father's letters. A week later, Emma came into the living room holding her phone. Grandma texted me. I looked up from the dishes. "Yeah?" She asked if I wanted to come up to the lake for the weekend, just me and her, no one else. I set the towel down. "Do you want to?" "I'm not sure yet," she said. But it's the first time she's ever asked just me. No mug, no ceremony, just asked. I nodded slowly. "That's something." She studied me for a moment. "Are you okay with that?" I thought about it. About how my mother had spent most of her life failing to notice me, and how now she was trying, in slow, clumsy steps, to notice my daughter. "I am," I said. "Because maybe that's where healing starts, not by fixing the past, but by changing what we do next." Emma smiled. I'll let her know. She walked away, tapping a reply with a calm I admired, and I stood in the kitchen, hands wet, heart full, wondering if this was what redemption actually looked like. Not a dramatic confession, not a grand apology, just a quiet invitation. 2 weeks later, I found myself back at the lake house, alone. Emma had gone up the weekend before, just like she said she might. She came back quiet, reflective, but lighter somehow, like she'd left something heavy behind. I didn't ask for details. I just listened when she said, "We talked. A lot." It wasn't easy, but I think she's trying. That was enough for me. Now I was standing on the porch again, a box tucked under my arm. The sun was just beginning to dip, casting long shadows across the grass. The lake shimmered like a mirror, soft and endless. Ryan wasn't home. He was in Chicago for the summer, interning at a non-profit. The house was quiet. I stepped inside. Everything looked the same as it had weeks before. Same fresh paint, same polished furniture, same careful rearrangement that somehow made the place feel less like my father's and more like a rental cabin. But something was missing. His presence. And maybe, for the first time, I understood that what had hurt the most wasn't that the keys went to Ryan. It was that no one had asked what I remembered, what I carried, what pieces of this place had lived in me long after I moved out. I set the box down on the kitchen table. Inside was the bracelet, the mug, the letters, the notebook, and a photo of Emma and me on her 10th birthday, the last time we came to the lake together before everything started to drift. I unpacked the items carefully, placing each one in a small wooden drawer near the fireplace, the same drawer where my father used to keep spare matches and fishing hooks. I lined them up neatly like offerings. Then I sat on the porch and waited for the light to change. It did, slowly, like it always had. The sky turned orange, then pink, then a deep velvet blue. The air cooled. The trees went still. And I felt something begin to loosen inside me. A few minutes later, headlights appeared through the trees. My mother stepped out of her car holding 2 paper bags. "I brought dinner," she said. "Figured I owed you at least 1 meal in this house." I smiled. "You owe me a lot more than that." "I know," she said softly. We ate on the porch, mostly in silence. At one point she looked out at the lake and said, "He loved it here. Your father. Even when we fought, he always came back to this place like it healed something in him." "I think it did," I said, "and I think it still can." She looked at me then, and not just at me, but into me, as if she were finally seeing the boy I used to be, the man I became, and the wound that had never fully closed. "Thank you," she whispered, "for still letting me try." I nodded, not because it was okay, but because I was tired of needing it to be. As the stars emerged overhead, we sat in the quiet, not as mother and son trying to rewrite the past, but as 2 people choosing to remain at the table long after everyone else had left. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. The house was still. No movement, just the soft creak of wood adjusting to the cool dawn air. I stepped out onto the porch with a blanket draped over my shoulders, the lake still covered in mist. It looked like it had been wrapped in memory, the kind you can't quite touch but feel all the same. I sat in the old rocking chair, the same one my father used to sit in. It had been moved to the corner away from its usual spot. I dragged it back. It made a familiar sound across the floorboards, like it had missed being there. In my lap, I held the final letter from the bundle. I hadn't opened this one. I had saved it. Maybe because I didn't want the connection to end. Or maybe because I wasn't ready to let go of the idea that there was still something left to learn from him. I opened it slowly, the paper delicate, yellowed at the edges. "Ben, if you're reading this, maybe you've already found the others. Maybe you've been carrying questions longer than you should have. Maybe you think I let you go without seeing who you were becoming. But I didn't. I saw it all. You were sensitive, but strong. You loved hard, even when it hurt you. You asked big questions, even when we had no answers. And I want you to know I was proud of you. Not in the ways people write in graduation cards or say in speeches. I was proud of the way you stayed kind, of the way you looked out for your sister, even when you felt left behind, of the way you sat with me in silence and never once asked me to be more than I could. You were enough. You always were. I closed my eyes, the letter trembling in my hands. My father had never raised his voice, never made big declarations, but these quiet words, felt louder than anything he could have shouted. Later that morning, Emma and my mother joined me on the porch. We didn't talk much. Emma sat beside me and leaned her head on my shoulder. My mother sipped her coffee and stared out at the water like it was a mirror. Eventually, she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small chain, a silver bracelet. It wasn't the one I made for Dad. It was different, new. She placed it on the table between us. "I had this made," she said, almost embarrassed. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have something. Not just from me, from all of this, from here." I picked it up. On the inside, engraved in tiny script, were 4 words. "I see you now." I didn't cry. Not right away. I just nodded, running my thumb over the engraving, letting the weight of those words settle. Later, as we packed to leave, I placed the bracelet inside the notebook. Not to hide it, just to keep it with the rest of the story. Before we pulled out of the driveway, I looked back one last time. The lake, the porch, the rocking chair, all still there, but something inside me was different. I wasn't waiting anymore, not for apology, not for recognition, not even for closure. I had seen the truth for myself, and that was enough. A month later, Emma left for college. We packed her things into the trunk of the car, the usual mix of boxes, bags, and folded hopes. The mug rode up front with her, wrapped again in that same towel, resting in the passenger seat like something sacred. She hadn't said it, but I knew she was taking it with her, not because it meant much, but because of what had happened around it. It had become a symbol, not of pain anymore, but of change. The drive to her campus was long, but we didn't mind. We talked, really talked, about the lake, about family, about what forgiveness actually looks like when it's not followed by fireworks or violins, just small moments of willingness. After we got her settled, she hugged me hard, the kind of hug where her arms stayed wrapped around my neck a little longer than usual. Her voice was soft in my ear. "You've given me more than you think, Dad." I pulled back, brushing her hair from her face. "Just don't forget where home is." She smiled. "I won't." The ride back was quieter. The house felt empty without her, but not hollow. I sat in her room for a while that evening, not out of sadness, but gratitude. The bed was neatly made, a few books left behind. And on the dresser, tucked beside a framed photo of the 2 of us at the lake, was the silver bracelet. I picked it up, turned it over. "I see you now." I didn't need to wear it. Just holding it felt like enough. The next day, I drove back up to the lake. Alone, again, but this time by choice. The house was closed for the season. I didn't go inside, I just stood on the dock staring out at the stillness. My father's words echoed in my mind. "You were enough." I took the letters out of the glove compartment, held them one last time, then I tucked them beneath the floorboards of the dock, in the same spot where we used to hide our fishing lures. I left the notebook there too, not to discard them, but to let them belong to the place they came from. A quiet offering to the past. A gesture of release. I stood there until the sky began to change, from soft blue to amber, then dusk. And I whispered, not to anyone in particular, "I see you too." Then I got in the car and drove home.